This is the EMBER Exchange, and I'm Pastor Matt. So, whether we're talking about something from the scriptures, recapping one of the messages from our church, interviewing a guest, or answering your burning questions, we will do it unrushed, one puff at a time. The same is the best way to enjoy a cigar. This week, we're going to talk about David and Goliath, which is a Bible story I think we've all heard about. If you've ever been to Sunday school, it seems to be something that crops up about once every 6 weeks in those places. Anyway, there's a lot of that story that gets overlooked and gets missed, and we kind of take the story of David in our brain and get the pieces out of order. And so I want to set some of that straight and maybe give you a little bit of a different perspective on a Bible story you're familiar with. So at any rate, as the story begins, and I think we all know this, Samuel shows up at a dude named Jesse's farm and anoints his youngest son, David, who's a shepherd, that he's someday going to be the king of Israel. And then in our mind, we cut immediately to the story of David and Goliath. Well, there's some time that happens between there where David is called to serve Saul, to play music for him. And if you read that Bible story, it's in the chapter in 1 Samuel before the story of David and Goliath, that David is made Saul's armor bearer. And what that means, we don't really have that in our society, so it takes a little explanation. What that means, it's kind of like a page would have been to a knight in the medieval times, but it's also like an understudy where they're taught military tactics and military strategy and logistics and so many other things. It's really a grooming for someone to become a commander in the military. And so as someone who had served for the king as his armor bearer, the expectation would be that when David entered the army, he would be entered into command. So it's a whole lot like what in our world we would see as the aide to the commander-in-chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who in our world is a lieutenant colonel or a major. And so this is really a grooming space for him to become an officer. And then fast forward, what rabbinical and historical scholars say is likely 3 to 5 years where the story picks up that David is no longer the king's armor bearer. It doesn't tell us why. And that David is now back being a shepherd for his father, and he is sent to the front lines of a war to deliver supplies. That was their form of taxes. And he shows up, and there are his brothers. His brothers are all in the army, and so David is likely 19 years old. And had he been 20, he would have been drafted into military service. So he is likely 19, 18, honestly, at the earliest. And he goes to deliver the supplies, and he goes and finds his brothers, and that's where Goliath is introduced. As Goliath comes out every morning to challenge the army of Israel and says, hey, let's not go to war, just send one guy down to fight me one-on-one, and whoever wins the war. And Saul won't send anybody out to fight him. And of course, David, the story goes that David starts asking the soldiers up and down the line, who is this Philistine that challenges God's army and nobody will go face him? And somebody goes and tells the king, King Saul, somebody goes and tells the king what David is doing. Now, here's the part of the story that gets missed. And this is where, as a reader of the Bible and as someone trying to understand Scripture, we have to ask ourselves questions as we read. Like, why did this happen? If David was a child, like the stories and the artwork so often depict, if David was a 13 or 14-year-old boy and he was there saying, why isn't the king sending anybody out to fight this guy? Why? And he was criticizing the king's battle plans, why would anybody care enough to go tell the king? And if it was some 14-year-old farm boy, why would the king care enough about what he said to demand him to come before him and answer for his criticisms? This is because David was very well known. He had been the king's armor bearer for 3 to 5 years. It was expected that he would effectively be a general as soon as he entered the army on his 20th birthday. So David's opinion mattered to people. And so as David is criticizing the king's strategic decision to not face Goliath, and David is called before Goliath, that's when David starts to shine as a Bible character. When he says, I protected my father's sheep, and I've battled a bear, and I've battled a lion, and God has protected me through both, and God will protect me as I battle this Philistine. And he convinces the king to let him go battle this Philistine one-on-one, to go battle Goliath, the giant, one-on-one. The king offers him his armor to wear, and David refuses it and says, he says, I've not proved it, is the way it reads in the King James, which we've all seen the Bible story pictures of a little kid trying to put this armor on, and he's not strong enough to hold it up. In the context, what that really means is this is the king's armor, and I am neither the king nor am I in the army. It is not appropriate for me to wear this armor, is what that really means. And so then it says David goes and gets 5 smooth stones from a stream and goes out to face Goliath, whips up his sling, slings the rock at Goliath. It hits him in the head, knocks him unconscious. David runs up, chops his head off with his own sword, and then, of course, Israel then has the win of that battle. There's 2 things there that I want to point out. The first is David selected 5 stones to take with him. So the first question we have to ask is, okay, well, why did he do that? Did he think he was going to miss the first 4 shots? Did he think it might take 5 shots to knock Goliath out? Why did he do that? Well, and that's not apparent just from reading this particular Bible story. You have to read the rest of the story. And it's mentioned 7 or 8 chapters later in 1 Samuel, and is brought up again in 2 Samuel. So you have to do some broad reading to see this. But Goliath had 4 brothers, or the word brother there is a little challenging, at least 4 countrymen from Gath, the city that he was from, at least 4 other brothers who were giants. And so David was not only prepared to face Goliath, David was prepared to face Goliath and his 4 brothers. And then when he runs up to Goliath and Goliath is unconscious, and here comes the Israeli army rushing down the mountainside from where they were encamped, David takes Goliath's sword and cuts his head off. Well, why'd he do that? That problem was taken care of. And this becomes the allegory for what we learn for our lives from this story, is David had a challenge to face in Goliath. And he didn't just knock the challenge out. He didn't just knock the problem unconscious. As he addressed that problem, that's the allegory, is the challenge or the problem in our life, he didn't just put it away for now. He put it away and then made it, by cutting his head off, made it so that problem can't come back again. So often in our lives, we face problems and we address them, but not address them in a way that it's never a problem again. We address it for right now. Well, that'll be okay for now. And we're just setting ourselves up to have to battle the same fights over and over again in our lives. And not only did David do that, he was prepared with 4 other stones. He was prepared for all the problems related to that problem. And so when we address challenges in our lives, we have to be strategic and think about, okay, when I fix this, how do I fix this so that it's never a problem for me again? And how do I fix all of the other problems that are related to this one, so I can put this problem to rest in my life, improve my life, and move on to the next thing. So at any rate, that's what I wanted to share with you today about the story of David and Goliath. So until next time, keep your fire burning, keep your cigar lit, send us your burning questions. We'll talk soon.